She's the coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, has over 30 years of experience championing country-driven multi-sectoral action to end malnutrition. So before we begin the session, let's hear the video message from Afsan for all of us. A round of applause. Thank you. So now let's begin with today's agenda. We have been talking about solutions that can be scaled. We heard some of the research and implementation presentations yesterday. And today for our keynote lecture, we will hear from someone who has been in this field for multiple decades and has actually implemented solutions at scale for nutrition. So it's my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker for Delivering for Nutrition 2025, Dr. Tehmeed Ahmed. Dr. Tehmeed Ahmed is Executive Director of ICDDRB, the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research, Bangladesh. He has served with the World Health Organization, where he contributed to revising global guidelines on the management of childhood malnutrition. He has been widely recognized for his contribution, received the Bangladesh Academy of Sciences Gold Medal for Outstanding Achievement, and in 2024, he was honored with the Gates Foundation Goalkeepers Award for Nutrition. He was also named to the Time 2025 list of the 100 most influential people in global health. So we have amongst us Dr. Tehmeed Ahmed today. And to moderate this session, we have Her Excellency Veronique Lorenzo, who is European Union Ambassador to Nepal, an economist by training, bringing more than 30 years of international experience, primarily in development cooperation. Over the course of her career, she has lived and worked in several fragile and conflict-affected contexts, including Mozambique, Afghanistan, Uganda, Myanmar, and Somalia, where she served as EU ambassador from 2006 to 2008. At the EU headquarters, Ambassador Lorenzo has also led major thematic portfolios as head of Environment and Biodiversity Unit, and later Health, Education, Culture, and Research Unit at the European Commission. Your Excellency, can we have you on the dais? So a nutritionist and an economist, it'll be an exciting conversation. So now I hand it over to Your Excellency, and please take, you can speak from here, you can speak from there, wherever you want.
No, namaste. Good morning, everyone. And respected guests, welcome. Welcome to Kathmandu. I'm really honored to be here at the Delivering for Nutrition in South Asia 2025 conference. This is a key regional platform that brings together policymakers, researchers, implementers, and development partners to advance evidence-based nutrition solutions for South Asia. And nutrition really is the foundation for prosperous lives and for prosperous societies. Unfortunately, millions of children in South Asia still remain stunted, and this carries long-term consequences for their health, but also for their learning and economic opportunities. And every child deserves a chance to grow, to learn, and to thrive. And today's discussions are really important to see how research, innovation, multi-sectoral collaboration can be translated into real impact for millions of children, women, and communities. Nutrition is a human right, but it's also the foundation for sustainable development. And research evidence has shown that the first 1,000 days remain the decisive period during which lifelong health, learning, and well-being are shaped. Nepal's own experience through successive multi-sector nutrition plans demonstrates the value of political commitment, multi-sectoral collaboration, and engagement at all levels of government. And the European Union has been a long-term partner in Nepal's nutrition agenda. Our current support includes a 21 million euros in budget support for the third multi-sector nutrition plan. And this budget support is complemented by technical assistance in partnership with UNICEF and grants to 3 civil society organizations that are aimed at strengthening governance, service delivery, and to prod social and behavior change. And through these interventions, the European Union hopes to contribute to expand access to quality nutrition services, to promote equitable outcomes, and to support the institutional capacity needed to implement these evidence-based nutrition strategies effectively. And because progress advances fastest when we learn from each other, it's our great honor, and I look forward to engaging with Dr. Tahmid Ahmed to explore how lessons from other South Asian countries like Bangladesh can inform strategies to scale nutrition interventions across the region and to contribute to lasting improvements in nutrition outcomes. Thank you.
Dr. Ahmed, I hand it over to you for our keynote lecture.
Your Excellency, Madam Chair, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning and Assalamu alaikum. Really a great honor for me and a privilege to be standing here today to talk about one of the very important conditions that mankind faces today. And this is one particular aspect of childhood malnutrition, a condition called stunting. The conference this year is focusing on implementation, on scaling up. And today I'm going to talk about what has happened as an example to a country like Bangladesh. Why have the rates of stunting gone down? What did we do in terms of scaling up, in terms of implementation? What are the pitfalls and challenges, and what we have to do in the near future? So over the next 35 minutes or so, I'll talk about the burden of childhood stunting. I'll talk about the results of a of an interesting analysis called ecological analysis that we did on stunting in Bangladesh. And I'm going to talk about WASH and tell you, reiterate, you already know how important it is for reducing stunting. And finally, I'll wrap up by talking about an innovation that we can use for childhood stunting. First of all, the burden of childhood stunting. As I speak to you today, we have about 148 million children all over the world suffering from stunting. And in Bangladesh, we have millions, several million of children suffering from this condition. The question that rings in all our minds is that the world produces so much of food, but why should children, adults, needlessly suffer from hunger, needlessly suffer from conditions such as stunting and wasting? For this, economists have looked again and again to find out the cause. It was in 1798 that the famous economist Robert Malthus, he published an essay, and the essay was titled Principle of Population. And the moment he had it published, he was criticized by his peers because the very essence of his essay was very much controversial. He said that population grows exponentially while food production increases linearly. So that was virtually a doomsday prediction by Malthus. Fortunately, that didn't happen as a cause of malnutrition, hunger today. But very recently, Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize laureate in economics, by working on the Great Bengal famine in the 1950s, the famine that occurred in Bangladesh in 1974, the famines that took place in Ethiopia and Central African Republic, he concluded that famines are not primarily caused by a sudden drop in food supply, but they result from failures in entitlement. He uses the word entitlement, which is the right. People's ability to access food through legal means like production, trade, or state transfers. So you can see that the root of malnutrition lies in food, food security, and economists have tried to look at it in different ways. Now, when we talk about stunting, what's happening all over the world? We were taught that stunting is a condition that starts after 6 months of age when the child is taken off the breast of exclusive breastfeeding. But the recent data has proved us otherwise. On the slide, you can see the results of a massive study. This study we did on 52,000 children from Latin America, from Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as South Asia. And you can see on this slide, on the right side panel, that the incidence of stunting is not increased after 6 months of life. It is the highest in the period between birth and 3 months of life. What does this indicate? This indicates that actually stunting, malnutrition, they start when the baby is in the womb of the mother. It starts in utero. So whatever we do, we have to take care of the adolescent girl, the future mother. We have to take care of the woman who is pregnant today. When we compare the 3 continents, we found that it is South Asia where the incidence is even higher than that in Sub-Saharan Africa as well as Latin America. We also tried to look at what's the association with national health expenditures and stunting. On this slide, you can see the 3 panels, and you will notice that the higher is the national health expenditure, the lower are the rates of childhood stunting. So that means that stunting is a development issue. That means stunting is an issue of economics. The question is, why are we worried about stunting? Why? What does it matter? You know, I said that we have about 158 million children. Stunting increases the risk of death. If you compare children with stunting with children who are not stunted, the risk of death is increased 3 to 4 times. If they survive and if they grow into adults, there is reduced educational and employment opportunities. But very important, if they survive, they have their brains affected. That's what you see on this slide. We took children of varying nutritional status and we tried to look at the structure and function of the brain. We did the MRI, and of course this was with consent. This was after having obtained the Institutional Review Board approval. What we found was very striking. In our brains, we have 2 different types of substances. One is the gray matter that is composed of the cells of the brain, and the other is the white matter that is composed of the electrical wirings, the axonal connections, okay? And it's the white matter that comprises 60% of the entire brain. What we found was very interesting. Gray matter was not affected by stunting or wasting. But white matter, if you look at the panel at the bottom, it was correlated significantly with height for age, Z-score, as well as weight for age, Z-score. In other words, children suffering from stunting, they will have less white matter. So that's why nutritional status and in particular stunting is so very important for development of the brain. Let me now share with you the results of the ecological analysis of stunting in Bangladesh. By doing so, I'll try to tell you what has happened in the past in terms of scale up and how Bangladesh could have achieved such dramatic reductions in childhood stunting. So what is an ecological analysis? This one differs from a traditional analysis where we look at all the subjects, all the children, hundreds of thousands of children, you have to have the data. But in reality, that is not possible. So in case of ecological analysis, what you have to deal with is population level estimates rather than individual estimates. And the unit of analysis is the survey year. We are dealing with years of survey, for example, 1996 to 2022, instead of individuals. And scientists use a very simple method, which is simple linear regression with a robust standard error. So we use different data sources, starting from the demographic health surveys, Bureau of Statistics, World Bank, and also lately the multiple indicator cluster survey results. On this slide, you can see the years, starting from 1996 to 2007, 2018, finally 2022, and of late 2025. What you see here is the dramatic decline in stunting in Bangladesh. Look at what has happened. In 1996, stunting rates were as high as 60%. And look, there's been a steady decline, so much so that in 2022, stunting fell down to as low as 24%. Several weeks ago, we had the results of the mixed survey, and that tells us that stunting levels are still at 24%. What does this mean? This means that, yes, we have done pretty well, but now there is stagnation. Okay? And this stagnation is not good for the country, and I'm going to talk about that. So in terms of the ecological analysis, we tried to look at several domains. The first domain is socioeconomic household factors and how is it associated with stunting in Bangladesh. What you see here is coefficients, okay? In the middle, you see a vertical red line. If the coefficient is on the right side, that this indicates that the stunting rates have increased. If it is on the left side of the vertical line, it means that the stunting rates have decreased. To give you an example, I again reiterate, this is not the individual level data. This is the data analyzed in terms of years of analysis. So what happened is that when hand wash practices were pronounced in certain years, that led to an almost 1% decrease in the rates of stunting. Similarly, households with electricity, connection with the electrification grid, that also resulted in an almost 1% reduction in stunting. Look at open defecation. It's an increase, close to 1%. Poverty, extreme poverty, very important. And it seems that over the last years, by this analysis, there has been a reduction. There has been an increase in the rates of stunting to the extent of about 1%, 1.5%. Let's look at what happens in terms of morbidity of children. Children, they keep suffering from diarrhea, from fever, from acute respiratory tract infections. If you look at vaccination, Bangladesh is a wonder country. 95% plus vaccination coverage rates, one of the best in the region. And you can see if children have received vaccination coverage, all the basic vaccine, IFPRI vaccines, then again, there is a substantial and significant reduction in childhood stunting over the last several years. But in case of morbidities, acute respiratory tract infections, pneumonia, there is a significantly higher risk of stunting. And same with fever, almost a 3 percentage point increase in stunting if children have fever as a morbidity. Let's turn to maternal factors. We all know maternal factors are so very important. They are. Look at what happens. At least 4 antenatal care visits, cesarean section delivery, we don't want that. In Bangladesh, there's now an epidemic of C-section deliveries. That's not good, but that's the discussion for another day. Post-natal care visit, women empowerment, and facility-based delivery. All these have significantly reduced stunting in Bangladesh. On the other hand, look at what's happening in terms of maternal undernutrition. Maternal undernutrition based on body mass index, female literacy, illiteracy, marriage before 18 years, and then the birth interval. Look at what has happened. In case of reduced birth interval, there is almost a 3.5% increase in childhood stunting. That's why it's so important to increase the age at marriage. How we can do that, that's another question. Let's now turn to national level indicators. At the bottom, you can see the very basic things: milk production, road and transportation, the kilometers of new roads built in the country, production of eggs, production of rice, fish. All these have very marginal impact. You can see that the figures are straddling along the vertical red line. What this indicates probably is the gross inequity that still permeates throughout the country. And this is one of the reasons why people produce, but they can't consume it themselves. But at the top of this slide, there's one important issue that stands out. If you increase the gross domestic product by 1%, you see an reduction in stunting to the extent of 10%. Perhaps this is the most important thing that has happened in Bangladesh over the last several decades. Remittance, the ready-made garment workers, and then many other things that are happening in the country. I think that has transformed the economy of the country. And that is something that has led to this reduction in childhood stunting over the last several decades. But still, we have problems, we have challenges. This unfortunate lady, I had the privilege of meeting her in a remote village in Kurigram that was about 3 weeks ago. When I asked her, when did you last take fish in the diet? The answer was, not in the last 2 weeks. Then I took the courage of asking her about meat in the diet. She was just looking at the sky. She said that, well, perhaps more than a month ago. So this may be the data of one single individual, but this is an important data. And it speaks, does not represent the entire country, but it speaks for the importance of poverty and food insecurity that still happen to be very important drivers of stunting in the country. So as you listen to me, ladies and gentlemen, you must be thinking about the very important question. Can Bangladesh achieve the stunting target for Sustainable Development Goal 2? The answer is here. If you look at the baseline year, which is 2012, the rate was 42% stunting. And the average annual rate of reduction that we have calculated using a regression analysis is 4.3%. If you look at the SDG tracker, you will find that the government of Bangladesh target prevalence for 2030 is 15.5%. Now, using the average annual rate of reduction and using the values over the last several decades, we project that in 2030, the projected prevalence of stunting in Bangladesh will be 19.2%. So it is much more than the target of 15.2%. So the question is, how long do we have to wait? If we can't achieve in 2025, if we can't achieve in 2030, when will we be able to achieve the stunting 2 target? If you project, you will see that by 2025, the projected prevalence of childhood stunting in Bangladesh will be 15.4%, less than the government of Bangladesh target of 15.5%. I would say in retrospect that we, the government of Bangladesh, was very ambitious in putting up this lofty target of 15.5%. We should have been careful by not being so ambitious with this target. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now turn over to another very important issue. We talked about it, we listened to this yesterday. I will go into some of the details, and this is the relationship between water, sanitation, hygiene, and a condition that causes childhood stunting. And this condition is called environmental enteropathy. Many people call it environmental enteric dysfunction. Why the name environmental? Because it is very much associated with what is happening in the environment. Our environment is littered with bugs, bacteria, and these bacteria go inside the system of young babies, and this is how they cause damage to the small gut. Back in 1991, Peter Lunn, he actually published the first article where he postulated that, mucosal injury to children is the cause of childhood stunting. And he assumed that 43% of linear growth faltering that we see in children can be attributed to this condition called enteropathy. Now, to understand the mechanisms of enteropathy in a country like Bangladesh, we did an extensive study recently called the Bangladesh Environmental Enteric Dysfunction Study, the BEAD study. And you can see on this slide photographs of counseling and then the nutritional treatment. Following nutritional treatment, if children hadn't recovered, then we assume that they have this environmental enteropathy. And of course, with consent and other things, we did the endoscopy to look at what is actually happening in this small intestine. What we found was very interesting and very, very deadly. This is the normal villus architecture. If you see it under the microscope, you will see that very beautiful finger-like projections. These are called the villi. You and I have this. And it is through this villi we are absorbing everything that we take as food, and there is growth. But when the intestine is affected by this bacteria, the young babies who have a faulty immune system, the villi become distorted. When there is complete, destruction, then you can see the architecture of the villi is totally distorted. And this is, in a snapshot, what you see, what happens, traversing from normal intestinal architecture to distortion to a completely distorted intestinal mucosal architecture. And this happens to be the hallmark of environmental enteric dysfunction. From the BEAT study, we tried to look at what is happening inside the small gut of these very young children. This was reported very recently in the New England Journal of Medicine, where we showed that the duodenum, for those of you who don't know what is the duodenum, this is a part of the small intestine. This is supposed to be sterile, no bugs, no bacteria. But we, for the first time, we demonstrated that there were as many as 14 different types of deadly bugs that reside in the upper small intestine of children suffering from this condition. And that was done resulting from some sophisticated techniques. So the conclusion is that children with stunting and enteropathy, they have bad bacteria in their small gut, and it is the presence of this bad bacteria that's doing all the harm. So the question is, how do we take care of this bad bacteria and then repopulate the gut with the good bacteria? We have the bacteria in our intestine. It is through a very good symbiotic relationship that human beings and also animals, they maintain a healthy life. The issue is how to populate the gut with the good bacteria that can have all the good functions and structures. So what are the new innovations? I'm coming almost to the end of my talk. What are the new innovations based on what we know so far? Okay? There are several in the pipeline. And one of them happens to be what we call the microbiota-directed complementary food. And you can see the word microbiota. And this is a food that happens to be a food for the good bacteria, okay? So remember, we want to change the bad bacteria, replace it with good bacteria. This is the food that we have found over the last 10 years that it can replenish the good bacteria in the intestine. Very simple, but very difficult to understand. It is composed of chickpea flour, peanut paste, soybean flour, green banana pulp powder, not the ripe banana that we take at breakfast. It's the green banana, the vegetable, and of course you have soybean oil, you have sugar, and you have the micronutrients. When you prepare it, it takes the look of halwa and also tastes as good as halwa. And you can see at the bottom a woman, a mother, feeding her child this MDCF in one of the nutrition centers established in the middle of a slum in Dhaka. And this is a photograph of this slum where we did the first trial comparing MDCF2 with a controlled diet. What we found from this initial experiment was that MDCF2 was able to repair the immature gut microbiota that we found was very common in children with stunting. It promoted weight gain, and it also increased the plasma biomarkers that are related to formation of the bone. If you don't have long bones, you don't grow tall. So having good bones, growth of bones is very important for growth of children. And very importantly, there were biomarkers that showed that there was improved development of the central nervous system, the brain. So to summarize the results on anthropometry, we did a 2-year follow-up, and we found that this MDCF2 resulted in long-term increase in linear growth. And this is what we had aimed for. A couple of years ago, The Economist, they published a 2-page article, and they concluded by saying that for many malnourished children in the world, perhaps the microbiota-directed food could make all the difference for children suffering from wasting as well as stunting. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize by saying that yes, Bangladesh is a significant country. The prevalence of stunting has decreased significantly over the last several decades. And the analysis that we recently did shows that it is development, economic development, the annual gross domestic product, the household access to electricity, improved water sanitation hygiene, facility-based deliveries, antenatal and postnatal visits, they are all associated with reduced stunting prevalence. On the other hand, we also know that poverty, poor water sanitation hygiene, acute respiratory tract infections, fever of children, early marriage, less birth spacing, maternal illiteracy, maternal underweight, which happens to be a huge problem, particularly during pregnancy. These are all associated with increased chances of childhood stunting. So the ultimate question is, what can and what should be done to further reduce the burden of childhood stunting? And if this applies to Bangladesh, this can well apply to other low and middle income countries. There's a host of things that we can think of, this should be done. And this ranges from good governance to judicious spending to multiple micronutrient supplementation during pregnancy, hand hygiene, which is so important, real growth monitoring and promotion. And you can see within inverted commas, real. Just having growth monitoring and promotion in name only will never work. It will be a quandary of resources. It has to be real, meaningful. And of course, food security for the vulnerable and the use of novel interventions. We should not be complacent with business as usual. We need to move forward. The world has advanced so much. Why should we still have so many millions of children today suffering from malnutrition and dying? But if you ask me the question, what are you going to do? Because we can't have all of them today. We need resources, we need people. So the important things that we can think about today, which we can do pretty quickly, include good governance, okay? And then care of adolescent girls, I'm very keen, because the adolescent girl today is the mother tomorrow. If we don't take care of the adolescent girl, we are bound to have, mothers with poor gestational weight gain, mothers who are going to give birth to babies who are going to suffer from low birth weight and will be small, vulnerable newborns. We have talked about multiple micronutrient supplementation, and that has been found not only to improve the birth outcomes, but also to improve the health of the woman, health of the mother. We hardly talk about that. We are always focused on the birth outcome, not the health of the mother. And then hand hygiene. That to me is very, very important. Recently, we have looked at the complementary food of children, and in more than 85% cases of complementary food aid, these are tainted. These are contaminated with bacteria. And when these bacteria go inside the system, the bacteria then produce the country that I just described to you. Environmental enteric dysfunction. So we just have to promote hand hygiene the way we did during the COVID pandemic. And then, of course, food security for the vulnerable. I showed to you the photograph of that unfortunate woman in Kurigram. Stark food insecurity, poverty. Somehow, we have to take care of that. We have to reach out to these people. It has to be targeted support for the vulnerable women, the vulnerable children, girls, and also for the vulnerable, who are the elderly in this society. With this, Your Excellency, Madam Chair, distinguished guests, I would like to thank you very much for listening to what I have been saying. Thank you.
Dr. Ahmed, thank you very much for a fascinating exposition. I mean, some of the things I think we all know that nutrition is linked to the multitude of factors, but it's true that the recent attention on the microbiome and how to make it healthy is something quite innovative and full of promise. So I've kept the factors that you consider most important, and perhaps let me ask you a few questions around those. And of course, the first factor I would say is you've insisted on that early on in your intervention, the importance of intervening very early in the to prevent stunting. Not even in the first year of life in the womb, and treating adolescent girls. So in your experience, are these programs reaching, that you've experienced, reaching mothers, children early enough, adolescent girls? And what are the key barriers and solutions to improving coverage during pregnancy and the early life?
Thank you, Your Excellency. And this is a very important question for all of us. If I'm asked to give you a direct answer, I wouldn't say that, the early interventions are there in the field. I've talked about the importance of pregnancy. I've talked about the health of the adolescent girls. But unfortunately, neither in Bangladesh nor in adjacent countries in the region do we have enough of such interventions. That's why one of the problems that we see is weight gain during pregnancy. We have again and again seen that the weight gain during pregnancy among Bangladeshi mothers is suboptimal. During the third trimester of pregnancy, only 52% of the women, they have an appropriate weight gain. So imagine 50% they are not having appropriate weight gain. And these are all leading to the conditions that we see, low birth weight, preterm, and all these things. Even before that, the adolescent girl, yesterday we heard about weekly iron folic acid supplementation. Wonderful intervention. We need to have these type of interventions combined with dietary diversity. We have tried that with school students in Bangladesh, and seen that this really works. When you teach these school students, school girls, they go back home and they try to tell their parents that, look, this is what we have found out. We need to include these vegetables, fruits, and all these things in our diet. I think we should focus on all these things. And then coming to children, breastfeeding is one of the very powerful interventions. Unfortunately, exclusive breastfeeding during the first 6 months of life is only stalled at around 50–55%, no more than that. We want it to be at 80%, but that's a far cry. And then talking about acute malnutrition, last week we saw the results of the multiple indicator cluster survey. From 11% wasting prevalence, this has increased to about 14%. If you look at the WHO norms, anything which is more than 15% is an emergency. So in countries like Bangladesh, India, other countries, Afghanistan, we are actually hovering at emergency levels. Yet, we don't see the interventions in these countries. So I think we really need to think about interventions that should be implemented and scaled up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. And it's true, there's not one silver bullet, but a multiple pieces that contribute to reducing stunting. And given that, the multi-sectoral coordination is absolutely essential between different institutions, with research organizations, with civil society, with the private sector. From your point of view, and having a regional perspective, what mechanisms have worked best to sustain that absolutely essential collaboration across ministries and partners, and where do you think we need more work to align them further?
Thank you very much. Having looked at different countries that have been successful in bringing down the rates of malnutrition, there are some countries in Asia. Thailand, of course, is a front runner. And then we have several countries in Latin America that have successfully reduced malnutrition rates. What I see is the presence of champions. These are the champions at the highest level. And I'm talking about people at the statesmanship level, the president of the country or the prime minister. When we see that the statesmen, they have an avid interest in promoting nutrition, things happen. So in Bangladesh, fortunately, nutrition is at the highest level, at the prime minister level. We have the Bangladesh National Nutrition Council, and that is chaired by the prime minister. But we wait to see whether there is a really concerted effort at the highest level so that the real multi-sectoral coordination can happen. Okay? Until then, different ministries, different departments, they keep working in their own orbit. If you don't make them work together, we can never think of having success, at least with the nutrition-sensitive interventions. So I think, to give you an example, Thailand is a very good example. In Bangladesh, there have been a number of successes in the recent past where ministries have come together, they have joined forces, namely the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Food, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. But I think we need more of such examples.
No, thank you very much. And this is absolutely crucial to have the political will at the highest level that really impresses the need for coordination across institutions. And I think that's a very good example also for Nepal, where we have a tendency of working in silos. That's not exclusive to Nepal. I think it's very widespread. We've not only in your speech, but throughout the day yesterday, and throughout these 3 days, there are interventions or examples of interventions at different stages of maturity. Can you tell us a bit more and walk us through the steps that take an innovation from a small pilot to a fully scaled national program? The level of evidence countries in South Asia that they have to reach before integrating such innovations in their systems.
I think one of the most important things, and this I speak from my own experience when I go and talk with the policymakers, they always ask me, what is the evidence behind what you are talking about? Where does this evidence come from?
and they want homegrown evidence, okay? When I say that, well, this has been tried elsewhere and this has worked, the next question that comes to me is, if this has worked elsewhere, how are you sure that this is also going to work in Bangladesh? So the homegrown, the local evidence is very important. So we have to come up with that. That's the element number one. Element number two, I was hearing yesterday, we talked about pilots, small pilots. We don't want, a wardrobe, an array of small pilots, but sometimes you need proof of principle to show that, yes, this works. And only then can you talk about taking it to scale. So the small pilots, the proof of principle is very important. Policymakers, they also want to know that if you tried it on a smaller scale. So this is important. And then, very important, Your Excellency, again, from my own experience, is the advocacy. This is not just the policymakers. The policymakers also want to see what the civil society at large is thinking about. What are their views? So one has to go to the civil society and not to forget the professional organization. This is so important. I can give you one example. 30 years ago, we wanted to introduce zinc as part of treatment of diarrhea. This is now well established that if you give zinc, it is going to reduce the severity of diarrhea, it is going to reduce deaths. But when we started it, it didn't work. We then realized we hadn't gone to the professional organizations, the professors, the pediatric society, and that's why the resistance came. So we had to, go into a back gear. We went to the professional organizations, we explained to them, they understood, and it is then that this actually worked. So I think these are very important things for full-scale implementation and scaling up.
Thank you very much. And this is directly applicable to the region, right? These are processes. I see a room full of young professionals participating in this conference. What advice do you have for the next generation of nutrition leaders in South Asia who really aspire to contribute to improved child growth and development?
Very important again. And yesterday I was talking to 3 young nutrition students here in Nepal over lunch, and I was asking them, what made you come to nutrition? And they had very interesting things to say, but the goal was one, to work for an NGO, and which is fine. And I think one of the most important things to realize now, nutrition is at the crossroad. What I mean to say is that the traditional way of thinking about nutrition counseling, okay, giving supplementation here and there, perhaps this is not going to work. We have 800 million people today, they are hungry. A substantial proportion of this 800 million, they are suffering from undernutrition, both women and children. We have to think out of the box. Nutrition now embraces precision medicine. You may think that this is crazy, but this is not. Nutrition is now trying to think about interventions that can be really cost-effective, that can really improve nutritional status very quickly. We have to come up with these ideas. Otherwise, we can't take care of these millions and millions of people who are malnourished. So, to the students, Your Excellency, my first advice would be to study, to learn, to find out what is happening in the realm of nutrition, okay? And try to see how they can inculcate some of these in their day-to-day life. And as a student, my another advice would be to think about doing something that can tangibly be of help either to a mother or to a child. And if they can do this thing, I'm sure that will be the preamble for the rest of their life, for the rest of their careers.
Dr. Ahmed, thank you very much. I think we're running out of time. Will we open up the questions?
Yes, I'm sure our audience has a lot of questions. So if you have questions for Dr. Ahmed or Your Excellency Veronique, please come to the mics. There are 2 mics in the room. Introduce yourself and ask your question. Please be brief.
Thank you. Right now, we are undergoing a series of trial on MDCF2. What I showed here, following that, we have revised the formula, and this is now called microbiota-directed food instead of microbiota-directed complementary food. We are doing these 2 trials, one in Dhaka, one in Kurigram. There are trials ongoing in Tanzania, in Mali, in India, in Pakistan. So this will take some more time. I think within a year or 2, we will have most of the results. We are also doing this, what we call mechanistic studies, by which we are going to look at what happens to the gut microbiome, the mechanistic part. Based on that, we are going to go for, implementation. And I think you have a great suggestion, Santhia, and maybe we should have a full-scale discussion in the country with Bangladesh National Nutrition Council, with the Sun Academia and other platforms where we can discuss what MDCF means, how does it work, and how we can take it forward. Very good question. The first one, per capita calorie intake, actually that was not in the analysis, but as a corollary, I talked about the unfortunate woman, and I showed it as one single piece of data. And I tried to focus, emphasize that this is still happening in the country. And this talks about food insecurity and poverty. Poverty, if you have looked at the recent newspaper reports, poverty shows an increase. And this is not just single to Bangladesh. We are seeing this in many other countries. And this is stemming out of many things, you know, what's happening in Eastern Europe, and then the overall food price hike. Bangladesh is no exception. And that's one of the reasons why we are seeing an increase in rates of childhood stunting. So when you talk about the per capita calorie intake, remember that this is per capita. This is an average. And we know the gross inequity that still permeates through the society in Bangladesh. And on top of that, the ecological analysis that does not go down to the individual level. As I mentioned, that this is by year, okay? The year of the survey, the year of the data collection is the unit, not the individual children. Household income data, that was not there because for this ecological analysis, you have to have years of data. Just having 1 year of data will not be enough. So perhaps this household income data was not available for all these years. That's why this has not come up.
Doctor,
But of course, the gross national income, that was there. Although gross domestic product has a huge implication, 10 percentage point reduction in stunting. But if you have focused at the bottom of this slide, gross national income did not have such an important impact. And I think that's because of the inequity.
Dr. Ahmed, since we don't have a lot of time, can we take this round of question, like the 5 that we are here together? And then maybe in your response, you can cover them. Please be very brief in your questions. We only have 5 minutes, and we need time for Dr. Ahmed to respond. Sorry, can he go first? Please be very brief, just the question. Afzal bhai, one question per person. Thank you. You and then Derek, and then we will go over to Ahmed Bhai. Derek. Over to you, Demit Bhai. There's one question I would like from a virtual presenter, and I think a lot of us are thinking the same, that they want to know why sugar was included in the microbiome-directed food formulation. Why sugar was included in the microbiome, the food, complementary food that you shared, why sugar was included in that? So that's a question, and now over to you. I apologize, I know there are a lot of questions, but Tehmeed Bhai is here with us today and tomorrow, so please find time during lunch break, tree break to ask your questions. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ishan. First of all, let me talk about the climate change question. Very, very important. This is something that we hardly talk about, okay? I don't have the answer, but what I can tell you that based on simulations that have been done, by the year 2050, the population will have grown to 200 million plus in Bangladesh. At that time, Bangladesh, in one of the worst scenarios, I repeat, worst scenarios, Bangladesh will be producing much, much less food than what it's going to consume. So we need to think about it, particularly climate change and food security. We are looking at descriptive issues, but we are hardly talking about mitigation and adaptation strategies. And I think we now need to do this. My friend Ram has a very important question. Thank you. Delivery of intervention. I think in my last slide, I showed some of the key things that are important for all countries. This is nothing new. All we need to do is to take them, few of them. Perfection is the enemy of good, so we should never try to take everything together. Take few of them, and I pointed out to some of them for adolescents, for maternal nutrition, and for childhood nutrition. These have to be scaled up, and for scaling up, we need to follow everything, the supply chain, the delivery, and everything. That is very context specific, that is very local. You mentioned about evidence, there is evidence, but what I would say is that many a times you require evidence. See, after all, it's evidence that vitamin A supplementation works in reducing mortality, particularly in Asia. That's why countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, they are having this vitamin A supplementation campaigns coming directly from evidence. The SDG stunting target, 15.5, I think that what I mentioned was pretty aspirational. I think we need to talk amongst ourselves and see if we can revise this target. Otherwise, we will have to wait till 2035, as I've shown. But in the interim, I think for overcoming this stagnation, one thing that we need to do is to, implement, increase the coverage of at least the nutrition-specific interventions. Vitamin A, micronutrient supplements, treatment of acute malnutrition, counseling during pregnancy, so on and so forth. For this, you don't need to wait. You have some of the resources and you need to go ahead. Good governance, okay? And how does it apply to Nepal? In all these countries, the governments have placed resources. Now, it is up to us to see how these resources are being properly utilized. In many countries, including mine, we see at the end of the year unuse of the resources. So the spending is also not judicious. So when I say that we need to have good governance, I also include judicious spending. If you have the resources, spend it. Spend it judiciously. Make use of whatever resources are available. And I can tell you, resources are there. Only that governance is not a very important thing in that element. MDCF. One of the goals of MDCF, we have now gone to the last mile. We now know what the good bugs they like to eat. It's not the fat, it's not the protein. There's something in the carbohydrate. There's something in the chola, the chickpea, in the green banana. We call it the glycans. These are the things that the good bugs take. And it's Mother Nature that has given them the property of taking this. Not other bugs can take these very good things. What we now are planning is to take the glycans. It will be just like a sprinkle, and the mother will just have to sprinkle it over a small ball of rice. And that's probably going to do the trick.
Your closing remarks.
Okay. Dr. Ahmed, it's been a privilege listening to you, and the number of questions, I think, confirms the wide interest for your insights that I think resonate across South Asia. And thank you also for highlighting the critical elements for sustained progress on child nutrition. You really underscored how early intervention, strong multi-sectoral coordination, and above all, evidence-informed solutions are really essential to design interventions that mean no child is left behind. For me, nutrition is really at the foundation of human development. It's linked to health. It's linked to learning, it's linked to productivity, it's linked to agriculture. So it really means that investing in nutrition is investing in the future of our societies. And we as European Union remain committed to supporting Nepal. Here, we also in Bangladesh. But here in Nepal, we really support the building of inclusive, resilient, and nutrition-friendly systems, and also to ensure that equitable access to quality services for all communities and for every children. As you have another day and a half, or more than that, of conference, let me repeat what you said, because I think that's the important message. To encourage participants to focus on practical measures, on practical pathways to scale effective interventions, to share innovations across borders, and to strengthen regional collaboration. I think it takes this, all hands on board, all hands on deck, to make sure that every child has a chance to grow, to thrive, and to realize their full potential. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for giving the time and for your very insightful remarks. I want to thank you and also the European Union for all the support that you have been providing in different parts of the world for nutrition. Thank you very much.